The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. Still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. It was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
We are the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute, HVRI for short. A lot of people know us from the 2018 eruption of Kilauea in the Lower East Rift Zone. Working under Hawaii Tracker on the Facebook group. Since then, we've been trying to carry on and take the lessons, the hard lessons that were learned during that eruption and try and prepare for the next major disaster that comes to our island.
Yeah, so we do that through two different programs. One is volcano education, and the other part is digital resilience, which we address through online groups on social media. So the way the two programs work together is that the social media networks end up being a distribution pathway for all the information. And having that network in place means we can provide more than just volcano education, but any other preparedness information as well.
What we were working for really came about in the Mauna Loa eruption in 2022. Within hours of that eruption starting, we had the mayor, Mitch Roth, we had USGS-HVO Ken Hahn on the stream trying to help flush out a little bit of the ongoing because it's so new. It's completely different from our previous major eruption, which was 2018.
One of the things that Talmadge and I were talking about was how do we deal with social media? And it was something we needed to figure out and get right. Our job is to get information to the public and make sure that the public get it as well as possible and as correctly as possible. When Philip and Dane started coming to and live streaming the meetings, it was great because we were reaching more people than we normally would. So when the eruption actually happened, we had this relationship. The interviews we did during the eruption, the most fun ones were the ones with Philip and Dave because they were more relaxed, and we knew we were getting to the local community, and people were asking questions. So those were the best. I think I just want to really give a shout out to those guys and how we worked as a team on this eruption. It really worked out well, and we got to a lot of people we wouldn't have normally gotten.
Aloha, everyone, and welcome to our Hawaiian Volcano Tracker for February 12th, 2026. We are HVRI, the nonprofit Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute, and we're here to keep track of Kilauea and ahead of its 42nd episode, which we expect to come within the next week here. How are you doing today, Dane? How's your week been?
Doing good, yeah. Just staying dry past week and
dealing with all the wet weather that we've been having. But besides that, a little taste of winter is kind of nice before we get all hot again out here.
Yeah, a lot of people were hoping for some rainfall last week to either help clear off their roofs or to replenish their water supplies after having washed off their roofs. All those random things. So we got that, and we are still waiting for the episode, which has not come yet. So we'll talk about that. And I do have a little video to play for you guys at the back half of this. It's going to be about the South Flank and Don Swanson and his colleagues, essentially what I'm calling the discovery of the South Flank. Where they gather all their data and show the movement of it and kind of incorporate and establish the model for Kīlauea structure that we now all are familiar with today and talk about here all the time. So that'll be presented by Dr. David Phillips from the USGS, and that'll be the back half of our show here.
Yep. And we always talk about the South Flank sort of driving the car, and it's interesting to see the development of that concept of the South Flank and what maybe came before it.
Right. It's usually that which is driving a car. Is it the South Flank or is it the rift zones? And they switch. They switch, right? So that'll be part of the discussion at the end there too. All right. So Dana will be leading discussion and collecting questions as usual. And otherwise, we'll get into our summary coming up next. Huh? Is that good, Dane?
That's good.
All right. Let's rearrange our screens here. All right. Aloha, everyone. This is our Hawaiian Volcano Summary for February 12th, 2026. Kilauea summit eruption remains paused, now 19 days following episode 41, as the volcano continues to recharge for its next round. Here's a live camera looking at the summit vents, which are currently degassing. North vent and south vent, and is now steadily glowing at night, as you can see from this time-lapse video of the nighttime views over the last week or so. Last week, the glow was a little more intermittent, so now it's a little steadier. And we have occasional moments where we have spatter bursts, such as this sequence captured this morning. And that's from the south vent in the background from the V1 camera, or now on the left from the V3 camera once again. Not as clear in that view there. So that's the most excitement we have here. The next episode is expected in the next week. In the meantime, we're tracking earthquakes. They are a little slower than they have been in recent weeks. We still have some events under the summit and the south flank of Kilauea in that ongoing steady pattern. If we look at the past month monitoring data, we can see that the earthquake counts per day remain fairly low. And the pulse of increase in the shallow regions that we saw earlier this month has slowed quite a bit as well, although it has not ceased entirely. Looking at the ground tilt for the past 3 months at the summit, you see here the deflation of episode 41 and the 19-day recovery thus far ahead of episode 42. And this is what leads us to believe that the episode is coming. All the signs are normal. We just had a 1-day deflationary excursion here this past Monday, which slowed things down and has delayed the window of episode 42 to between February 13th and 17th. That's starting tomorrow, with the most likely window between February 14th and 16th based on a modeled inflation. So on everyone's mind, of course, is what's the weather going to be doing? Well, we have a repeat of episode 41 where tephra fell all over the communities. And for now, the forecast from the National Weather Service today is that prevailing trades with periods of windward and Mauka showers is looking more like the more likely outcome through early next week. So keep your eye on that as well as the episode approaches. If there is tephra fallout, the USGS has a new tool, Is Tephra Falling, where citizens can report through this web form the size and distribution of the fallout for their compilation. For now, over the past week, this view of the daytime captures from the B1 camera show early Kona winds switching to trade winds earlier last week, along with this heavy wet weather that swept through the area, along with the trade winds here. So the current VOG forecast shows distribution from Kilauea to the southwest, wrapped around to the Kona coast, but that is being somewhat dampened by the presence of rainfall. Current citizen science monitoring network is showing slightly elevated readings in the South Kona area, but otherwise much clearer air than we've had in recent weeks. All the activity thus far has been contained within Kīlauea, the summit caldera of Kīlauea, with really the tephra and the fog being the only impacts outside of the area for any of our communities. That's a summary for Kilauea for this week as we await the next episode. Mauna Loa has had its monthly update released. It remains at normal and green alert levels, having experienced higher earthquakes last month, but still showing all the regular signs of recharge following its 2022 eruption. Here you see the summit GPS showing extension across the caldera, which centers around the mid-caldera area and the south caldera area, showing these slight fluctuations, but still the crater is extending as well as rising, while earthquakes continue at a fairly low rate under the summit and surrounding areas, as you see from the map of the past month here. In depth versus time, you see these are fairly spread out over the last month. And really, in summary, over the last 5 years, we were still at very low earthquake counts per month compared to the buildup ahead of that eruption. So there are still quite a few more markers to hit before we're anywhere near an impending eruption in Mauna Loa. So business as usual, long-term recharge, and nothing short-term. And that's our eruption. That's our volcano summary for this week. Okay, so let's go to our hazard summary, as really the hazard, the gas, and the fog are the main thing we're all concerned with. It's nice to go and see the pretty views, the amazing eruption of lava, all of that, but here we're focused on the preparedness of our community. So let's look at the various views of the gas. And we showed the B1 camera earlier. Pull us back to the start here. You can see here in the 6th and 7th, about a week ago, we had those trade winds come in and replace the Kona winds that were previous to that. So most of the week has been like this, off the gas off to the west, to the southwest, with rain and fog and those kind of weather impacts also obscuring the views here. That's the B1 camera. Here's a K2, which shows the viewing platform at Uekahuna right here. Just a little bit of fog in the first couple of days, and you start seeing wet pavement and a few visitors coming through during the daytime hours there, with all the fog blowing off into the distance into the Ka'u Desert there. Looking closer at the vents, this is the V1 camera. Again, the daytime views with whiteout in the same pattern as we see before. The gas starts blowing away from the camera later in the video, just like all the views we're going to see here. But otherwise, not a whole lot of daytime changes visible in events. Here's a wider view with a KW camera, the vents at our right now. We also see these fuming spots on the crater floor where the gas from the lava flows, and the buried lava lakes in here can continue to degas out through these cracks, and they catch the same pattern of changing winds as well. From further away on Mauna Loa, this would be the KP camera. And there you see the Kona winds first couple of days, and then a bunch of weather, hard to see far in distance. But when the weather does clear, you do see the trade winds keeping that volcanic plume close to the ground across the desert to the southwest. The V2 is the volcano house view. So for many people, this might be what you would see in the daytime. Early on, when it was foggier, you might have some glimpses of the vent. And then the rain comes in, and you really have to catch the views between the fog and whiteouts that come along with it. We have the S2 camera back online for a little over a week now. And so it gets the views slightly different there. And let's come around to the S2 camera. And there's our two vents blowing Kona winds, switching to trade winds. And not the clearest views from this camera there at the moment. Finally, the V3, our last one here, to show the pattern of the gas. And you see also some sulfur buildup around the vents, which is part of the degassing process as well. So that's really all the gas views of Kilauea. Our we like to use the VOG Measurement and Prediction Program, VMAP, out of University of Hawaii at Mauna Loa. And their forecast dashboard looks like this. It looks like it's loading its stations right now. So we have to start SO2 layer. So the gas, when it comes out in its pure form, is blowing here to the southwest and wrapping around Mauna Loa to some degree, and changing to the aerosol layer, becoming that more visible volcanic haze that lasts for longer on a Kona coast. You can see the forecast for that in a similar distribution as well. So not a whole lot to dig into there. We can look at our interactive maps, such as the state of Hawaii here, and see that currently things are in a green largely across the state, with a couple of yellow readings here down in Ocean View and in Kona, perhaps from this impact or potentially from other particulates as well. This is capturing all different sources of pollution reading on these instruments. Our citizen science network from Purple Air shows a similar pattern there, a little bit increased in the southwest. And in a national park, it's a little bit better there with everything in the green, the plume blowing to the southwest into the closed area. And if we look at the charts for the last few hours and days, you will see that everything has remained in the green for the recent past. So no gas to worry about in the parks, more the rain is the issue nowadays. If we look at the satellite views from the Mounts project, we can see a similar pattern that earlier last week we had some captures of south winds blowing VOG to the north, such as here on the 5th and the 7th and the 8th. But the more recent days, everything clears out as the weather has changed here. And once again, the National Weather Service forecast discussion from this morning does say there is some uncertainty. Right now, the trades are noted as being fairly breezy and to gradually decrease over the next couple of days. But even still, with the expectation that trade winds are the most likely outcome, even with the slowing trades. So there is more uncertainty towards the end of the model there, but hopefully that comes towards the end or after our window for episode 42. So that's really the thing to watch for here. So that's our hazard summary. And we'll jump over to some visual observations, starting with a live check-in to our V1 camera. There are our vents degassing. You can see a little extra fume over here in a far back wall too. The V2 camera, completely fogged out at present. And the V3 camera, there with fading light. Maybe we'll start seeing some glow soon as we check back in later tonight. So over the course of the last week, nighttime views from the V1 camera. Here they come. Started off with very intermittent, not very strong glow, and over the week has intensified, where most nights we're seeing fairly strong, persistent glow from both vents here. Keeping in mind that there are some dim spots because the weather is also coming between the camera. And as we mentioned in our summary, there are these occasional bursts of spatter. This here is the V1s. We're looking at the south vent there in the background. And from the V3, you don't see it quite as well. It's blurred out in a little light, but that was that single burst there at around 4 o'clock this morning. So we expect those to become more frequent. Perhaps we'll get these overflows ahead of the main episode, but we're still waiting on all of that as the volcano recharges back to its previous levels. Here is the V3 camera for all week. Starting off with just those few spots that we're noting about a week ago during our update, with intermittent glow, strengthening, and steady there throughout the rest of the evenings this week. Right. And finally, the V2 camera from further away. You don't see as well, but if you're a visitor to the park, you might get some views from afar with some magnifying instruments there. So that's really all there has been to see over the last week. We can look at the thermal camera, which looks through all that steam and fume, and we can see there's also been no major change on that. We've in the past sometimes seen some areas of floor settling or moving, and really it's been a long time since the last episode, and everything has stopped moving, and we've really seen no change over the past week here. And that's evident there on the thermal camera. We can use the daytime views from noon on the clear days for the past week from the KW camera here. And if I let that play around, you really don't see a whole lot change. You see the plume move around a little bit, but not really anything you can see with any part of the crater floor. And similarly, if I come to the east end of the crater, to the B1, and look at the daytime views of the past week once again as well, you see the changing light and wind conditions, but you see that looks like the plume is swirling around there, back and forth, but no changes anywhere on a crater floor that are evident from this distance and perspective. So those are the visual observations, with one final entry here. The USGS did do a summit overflight a week ago on the 4th, looking down into the vents in the daytime, while they had seen glow at night, could not see any lava in the daytime. And from the side, took this view of the crater floor as well. So those are our new entries into our visual record here for the last week of Kīlauea, and we'll continue to our monitoring. And I'll just mention the one text update from today. There has been a change over the week where the USGS has been adjusting their window based on the changing rates of inflation, deflation. So about a week ago, we said the window was going to start today or even yesterday, and slightly shifted because of the deflation happened earlier in the week. And so they note that as having been adjusted here, and still most likely around Valentine's Day based on modeled inflation. No activity on either rift zone, and otherwise still having relatively high SO2 rates, most recently measured around 5,000 tons per day. So that is really all to highlight here. There's not much else to note in the daily updates. Here our map, most recent map is about a month old as well. Still showing the extent of lava flows within the crater. So turning to the other signals, let's look at the 1 week long signals. Our laser has been a little useless recently, so let's move past that. It's not really showing the changes on the crater floor. And anyways, there haven't been any in the last week with no lava flows going across there. And no swelling from below either. Once upon a time, we could actually track magma injecting below the crater, the crust of the crater floor, and rises that way as well. But really, we don't see that here. And not only that, looks like our bar is really blown out, so you really couldn't see anything, even if there was a change happening here. So to data we can actually use, here's our 1 week summit and East Rift tilt. That East Rift is the green line. It's showing a few little bumps up and down, and this station in particular does show these little inflationary bumps of this kind of rate, especially when there's rainfall in the area. And as we've described, there's been a lot of rain recently. That's probably all that we're seeing here is little variations on that. There's no signs of any magma in that area. And in blue is the summit station showing the overall general inflation over the last week, with this 1 day from Monday to Tuesday here, deflationary period before it resumed and since has accelerated. The earthquakes have been low throughout here. Earthquakes per day were a little higher earlier in the week and really have slowed down quite a bit in both the shallow and deeper areas in the last several days here. The distribution we've covered is pretty similar to what we expect. Summit, south flank, and deep Pahala magma source by the hotspot. So we won't linger on that any longer. And once again, here's our crater elevation. This is a little bit better scale, but it's still showing a little bit of error there. And nothing much useful. Zooming out to a 1 month window now for our tilt. There is the East Rift in green, generally downwards with a few little deviations there and there. And the summit station showing inflation with this now more obviously smaller in a longer term of things, a period of deflation in the middle right there. Same pattern in other tilt meters, and earthquakes are still low. In fact, really a little bit lower here than they were earlier in the week, but all within the context of both of those being quite low compared to earlier this month, or about a month ago, earlier last month. So there it is, depth and time. You can see the thicker plots of circles here with more events in the shallow regions. It has slowed over time and slowed over here, right? If you recall, it's been 3 weeks ago now when we had the last episode. We had these earthquakes under the summit, and we were wondering, might there be a change? Might there be new cracks? And magma's exploring options of where else it could go with high pressure. So we haven't seen that yet, and that's interesting to track how this changes. Some episodes are having this as a precursory characteristic, and others are not. And we just watch and continue to use that as a clue to the best of our ability to keep track of what the volcano might be doing. So continuing on, here's the last 3 months of tilt. The same pattern continues here. You can see some of the other episodes have had these little slowdowns as well in the past. So that's not unusual either. We're just waiting for the lava to rise high enough to see more spatter, potentially produce overflows for some period of time, and eventually start the high fountain of lava, as it has done now 41 times since December of 2024. Okay, that's really all of our useful data. We've scrolled across the GPS. There's not really anything really new to note there, so I'll just leave that on a screen and move on to our earthquakes. And our earthquakes, oh, my map is not the way I like it, so I'm going to do a bunch of clicking here. And if you're someone who designs websites, right, and you think about how many clicks it takes for someone to get the information they want, let this be a case study for you right here. So all this extra stuff plotted on a map, that is not what we're trying to see here. All right, so really what we want is the last week of earthquakes, starting from a week ago to today. And we want them to be plotted by depth, which, okay, let's come back to here and force it to reload. All right. And to be consistent, let's put the satellite view back there again as well. So here we are, 1 week of earthquakes. Well, where'd they go? 1 week of earthquakes colored by depth. There they are, showing all the blues in the deep Pahala zone, at least in a concentration and space. And then you have this more sporadic population of all different depths. That's the settling on the west and northwest part of the island. We do see a few Mauna Loa events here at the summit and southwest of the summit, continuing that pattern of recharge. Nothing alarming, just showing it's alive in there. And then here are our Kīlauea events at the summit and south flank, and Mauna Loa's southeast flank, which is in between Mauna Loa and Kilauea zone, that is adjusting to the more steady pressure of Mauna Loa, but this kind of accordion style of Kilauea pressurizing and then releasing and pressurizing, releasing, and all that's causing this change of force between the two mountains here in between. So that's more or less what we've got going on with the earthquakes. Nothing unusual there. Looking at the earthquakes by size over the last week, the largest was a 3.1 down on Pahala, very deep down in that population, tied with a deep earthquake all the way up north. Also 25 miles down, quite deep, another settling event here. So this one is settling. This one is more of the hotspot feeder zone, showing pressure. Those are the two largest. We have a few others shallow above Pahala, as the ground above that responds to that changing subterranean deep swarm. And then we have a 2.8 here on the west flank of Mauna Loa, pretty normal as well. So those are our earthquakes. And with that, we'll jump over to our Volcano Watch for the week, which you can read in more detail at your own pace on our various channels. But here it is, handling the pressure, what gases trapped inside crystals tell us. And we're revisiting the chemistry that's being done, collaboration of the USGS-HVO and University of Hawaii at Hilo where students are helping prepare all these samples. And so here's an example of one of these olivine crystals that you might find in your lava sample from any episode or eruption. And within those, you can find these mountain inclusions that sometimes have vapor bubbles within them, sometimes have other fluids in there too. And they can essentially measure the dominant fluid in volcanoes is usually carbon dioxide. The density of it strongly depends on its pressure, which is influenced by the depth of magma at that point in time. So if they can measure the density of the CO2 within the inclusion, they can estimate the pressure and thus the depth where the crystal caught that bit of gas. So this is really challenging because the inclusions are usually from 0.01 to 0.1 millimeters, very, very small amounts. Here it is. We're in inches. It's got a lot of zeros before those fours right there. So they have to be analyzed using Raman spectroscopy, as it's called here. So all that, I'll kind of just jump here to the conclusion at the end, which is that preliminary results that span from mid-January 2025 to early July 2025 show the magmas came from about 1 mile, 1.5 kilometers deep beneath the surface, which is the depth of a shallow Halapē magma chamber. So we've had a volcano watch on this before. It goes back to the 2023 eruption. And so here was that graphic released along with the fluid inclusions. They then plotted, in that case, different days of eruption. That was a short eruption back in September 2023. And the depth from which they came, 1.5 kilometers, being right there in the shallow Halapē chamber once again. So that just shows you how we're still tapping this shallow source for all of our fountains, right? And earlier in the sequence, and depending on which sequence, you might find some of the lava flows might drain back in and get reworked, and so you might have some stuff that was in the lava lake as well being shot back out and captured in some of these flows too. So that is the volcano watch for this week, and with that, we'll come to our break. We don't have Lou with us live today, Dane, but he did give us some information to share.
Yeah, well, we got a little bit of a community corner, and then we're just going to get in the mid-roll, and it should be kind of quick, this. Main thing we have to promote... Oh, let me get that full screened. There we go. Main thing we have to promote right now is the Kohala Resilience Hub Fair, the Ohana Fun Day up in Hawaii at the Kamehameha Park, March 14th. It starts at 10 a.m. It runs to 1 p.m. We're helping organize this one as well. This is the latest of the civil defense micro fairs, but we've also worked with the Kohala Resilience Hub as well as the groups up there before. So when we participated in this, you can see Philip there doing our little lava demonstration in their flyer. So we will be attending that again. That is on March 14th. And one other thing I wanted to just promote, since it's happening tomorrow, there's a new Goodwill store opening in Hilo, donation center as well. And that'll be, you can see, on Maka'ala Street. So if you want to go check that out, they'll be opening tomorrow. But really, that's all we have for Community Corner. It's kind of quiet right now. And did have some donations wanted to shout out. Go ahead and hit the mid-roll. So yeah, Mahalo to all your support. We did have some donations come through. Wanted to shout out those before we get in. The Mark Hardman with a $50 donation just came through on over on YouTube. Raven made a $10 donation over on hvri.org/donate. $20 from Robin over on hvri.org. And then coming through reliably, Norm with a $20 donation. And I think I might have missed one somehow. I have one double listed. Oh, there was a... I think that might actually be it. for now. We appreciate all the support. Yeah, if you do want to if you do feel so inclined to make a donation, we take those on hvri.org/donate, as you see on the screen there. We also do have a fundraiser running through YouTube Giving over on the YouTube. So those are all of those donations come to us as well. So we appreciate all the support on either one of those platforms, how you are so inclined, but we also appreciate all the likes, subscriptions, the shares, all of that stuff, and as well as the 5i grant program and the Kilauea recovery program from the County of Hawaii for helping with fund our volcano education program, as well as their support for our digital resilience and youth development programs. All right, I think that gets us hustling through the mid-roll and can get you back to the swing of things. Sorry, I don't give you much of a break on this.
No, that's all right. I mean, actually, we definitely miss Lou. He's dealing with some personal issues right now. So, miss you, Lou. But we do have this presentation from a couple weeks ago. It was part of Volcano Awareness Month. It was Dr. David Phillips. This was an event that's called Remember Halapē that actually ran for 2.5 hours a couple weeks ago. So we've broken it up, and we'll show you the content from that in several parts. This is the first part, more of the geology side of things before we get into any of this, the survivor accounts and survivor stories, which we'll do in the weeks ahead.
Yeah.
Right?
This is a standalone, but it's really interesting and relevant for what we talk about.
Yeah, so we'll have a little intro from Cindy Preller, director of the Tsunami Museum, and then David Phillips following her. And this was put together as a talk story in Ka'u, and I've taken the liberty to add a few graphics to this one because I feel like the story of Don and colleagues' discovery of the South Flank deserved a little more illustration for you guys here that are catching this not live under a canopy in the beautiful Kahuku unit of Hawai'i Volcanoes National Park. So let's turn to our volcano awareness presentation, which is going to be Dr. David Phillips following Cindy Preller here. Introduction coming from the National Park. All right, here goes.
The tragic event, that incredible, devastating event down at Halapē 50 years ago. We are going to start with remembering Halapē, remember, learn, and prepare. Our next speaker is Cindy Preller. She is the executive director of the Pacific Tsunami Museum.
Aloha, mia kakao. How's everyone? Good, good. So glad you're here. I love this theme, the theme of paying attention to the past to save ourselves in the future. I want you to know that our island, our big island, has had more than just this single event in 1975. Our island is, of course, an active volcano, and we have all sorts of active seismicity, and therefore we have landslides, and we also have tsunamis, and they are locally generated. And I'm a veteran from the NOAA Tsunami Warning System, and I can tell you the technology will not warn you for a local tsunami. It's just too fast. I mean, my colleagues over in the warning centers, they need at least 3 minutes, and that's fast. And the tsunami will be arriving before that. So nature's warning signs, as David explained, are your only warning, and it's a critical warning. Plus also, what's mind-blowing is there's great cell service in Halapē. However, there isn't everywhere on the island, right? And so you cannot count on your phone, right? You really need to count on your wits. All right. So in 1868, we had a very large earthquake. It was a 7.9, and it generated a phenomenal tsunami locally here in Ka'u. 1877, we had a submarine eruption off of Mauna Loa that probably generated a tsunami. Hard to know. I don't know anybody that was alive then. We had a 6.8 in 1908. We had a volcanic landslide in 1919. 1951, we had a 6.9 earthquake in, just south of Kona. 1951, 1952, we had a 4.5, magnitude 4.5. That, in my perspective, is not that large. However, it created a tsunami. So before that, the lowest magnitude I had ever heard of that created a tsunami was tsunamigenic is the word, was a 6.5. So even a 4 or 5, which may not shake for 20 seconds, it might only be 10, but if it's sharp, hard shaking, you know, it's good practice to run up that hill, get your steps in, work out your lungs, right? And then, of course, 1975, a devastating event. But to also let you know, in 2018, we had an eruption that went down the rift zone. It also created a tsunami that day. It was very small, and there wasn't a warning, and no one was hurt, but it was recorded. We got some video. So, you know, if you're in a safe place, shoot some video for me, but get safe first. All right. Also, we have some anniversaries coming up. The Japanese tsunami was in 2011, and 1946 was 80 years ago, April 1st. David, my old buddy, the deputy scientist in charge at Hawai'i Volcanoes Observatory, phenomenal human, dear friend, thank you for coming.
He's a wonderful presentation there.
Love you.
All right, hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the 1975 Halapē earthquake and some of the roles and things that USGS Hawaiian Volcano Observatory learned before that event, during that event, and since that time. And I'm going to be sharing what I call the tale of scientific observation and discovery as recounted by USGS scientist Don Swanson. So Don Swanson is not here today. He's getting up there in age, but he is still a very active researcher. He was an emeritus scientist at HVO. The journey from Hilo to here in the beautiful Kahuku unit was a bit much for him today, so it's kind of my honor to represent and share some stories and information that he has given to me. He's a brilliant scientist, excellent communicator, and just very, very down to earth. And as we shall see, when he started his career in the 60s, from the very beginning, he was incredibly observant, very deep thinker, and was able to put information from different sources together to really help everyone understand kind of how these volcanoes work. And along with that, some of the hazards that are associated with how things work on these islands. So his first stint, and I have his notes here, so I'm going to be referring to my notes that he provided. So 30 years ago, by the way, Don was starting off as HVO scientist in charge, and he had that for 8 years at HVO. And before that, he was involved with the Mount St. Helens eruption and a lot of things through time. But he actually started his career with USGS here at HVO back in the 1960s. He was here on staff from 1968 to 1971. And back in time, so Don was saying when he was here, geologic concepts about much of Kilauea's internal structure were not really well known. There had been a lot of mapping at that point. There were, of course, a lot of olelo and descriptions of phenomena that had gone on for generations. And so what was happening at the surface was at least documented and described to some extent. But what was happening inside the volcano and leading to all of these phenomena that we're seeing at the surface was still a bit of a mystery. And Don was part of this team of early scientists at HVO who really started piecing together major phenomena like earthquakes along the southeast flank of Kilauea that generated the 1975 earthquake. So let's visualize. Don's going to be talking about some of the features. A lot of folks are probably very familiar with volcanoes and stuff here, but let's just kind of, we'll follow up David's idea of close your eyes if you want, or leave them open, whatever works. But let's kind of try and visualize some of the geologic features that Don is going to be referring to. So first of all, picture Kīlauea volcano in your mind. And everyone probably has a different view of what Kilauea looks like based on what parts of Kilauea you have seen. So let's back out and think of how Kilauea looks on the ocean floor. So Hawaiian volcanoes are a type of volcano in geology that are called shield volcanoes. One reason they're called that, the main reason, is that they look like, Roman shield, put it on the ground, it has that long, kind of broad dome shape. So Roman shield, Captain America shield, that kind of domed structure. So imagine that on the massive scale of Kilauea, but instead of just putting it on the floor, let's put it on the seafloor. Now, the seafloor that Kilauea and Mauna Loa and all the other islands on were here long before the current Hawaiian Islands were here. So the oceanic crust, estimated somewhere around 90 million years old underneath the islands, give or take a few decades. The Hawaiian Islands are much younger. Kilauea is a couple 100,000 years old. So Kilauea, the shield volcano, builds on top of the seafloor. So, you have something that's old and something that's young. And sometimes when you bring old things and new things together, they don't always get along. And so the interface between the ancient oceanic seafloor and the young volcano edifice, that interface between them is a zone of stress. It's a fault zone. It's a major fault zone. It's a special kind of fault that separates the overlying volcano from the underlying oceanic crust. It's so special it has its own geologic names. When we talk about volcanoes around the world and oceanos, it's got a French name. Anyone know what it is?
Robin?
Close. Robin's a collapse feature, and we see those on the volcano. That interface, that fault zone that's separating the ocean floor from Kilauea, it's called the décollement. Décollement. The largest and most destructive earthquakes in Hawaii, at least on the active volcanoes, are usually associated with massive earthquakes along the décollement. And they're particularly dangerous not just because of the magnitudes that they can reach, but because they are shallow and they generate tsunami, or at least they can. So let's go back to just the Hawaiian shield. And Hawaiian volcanoes, lava typically erupts from the summit, just like it's doing right now. Okay? You look at any Hawaiian volcano, you look at the summit, that's one of the places where most of the eruptions take place. What is another place, the other most common place along Hawaiian volcanoes where eruptions occur? Rift zones, all right, you guys are good. Heard that from a little bunch of places. So rift zones are zones of weakness in the volcano. It's where the volcano is splitting apart. It's a structural element. As you imagine that the volcanoes are erupting lavas that many of you here have seen erupting on the surface, which is an amazing thing to witness and be part of. And there's also magma intruding into the ground. So the volcanoes are growing through lava that we see on the surface, but also intrusions of magma underneath. And so it's easier for the magma to come up and find its way through these zones of weakness in the rift zones or at the summit. So there's kind of our basic setting. So now, as Don writes, on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day 1965, a small eruption on the East Rift Zone triggered a massive faulting episode adjacent to the Kauai fault system on Kilauea, which connects the East and West, Southwest Rift Zones. And that motivated Don and other HVO scientists, including Dick Fisk, to start really thinking about, like, what is really the relationship between these magmatic intrusions and faulting and earthquakes. And this opened up a floodgate of new ideas. And so Don and others quickly developed a concept that the intrusion of magma from deep in the rift zones made room for itself by shoving apart the rock on either side. So you can imagine the magma coming up underneath, and it's doing it in such a way that it's squeezing itself into these weaker zones and making its way to the surface. So that was one concept. Another concept that it could explain the same features observed would be that maybe movement of the rock is actually moving. Stresses in the volcano, gravity is acting on this heavy island, forcing it to move apart. So maybe it's not necessarily the magma squeezing in so much as the stress is released a little bit as part of the volcano moves, and that leaves space for magma to come up into the rift zones or up into the summit. And so it's kind of like, well, is it pushing or pulling? What's kind of driving these interactions? And there's still no exact clear-cut answer today, but like a lot of these things, it's probably a combination of both. There's a lot of interactions, and one often leads to the other. And as Ingrid Johansson at HVO, who is one of the current scientists studying these dynamics of Kīlauea, you know, as she says in her presentation on this, there's this intimate connection between magmatic intrusions and earthquakes. So either way, we should see cracks and extension forming on the flanks of Kilauea towards the ocean, Makai rift zones. So back in the 60s, to test these ideas, Don got triangulation measurements made on the volcano, surveyor measurements, going all the way back to 1896. And of course, these surveyors were not studying volcano deformation. They were making maps of the island, topographic maps, and maps for boundaries and things like that, and just getting a better picture of the islands. And so along the south flank of Kilauea, which includes that Kalapana and Halapē coastline, well, the surveyors had trouble. For some reason, they couldn't always get their measurements to match the way that they should when they were closing their surveys. And the surveyors at the time, they all blamed each other, like, oh man, that guy's a terrible surveyor. And oh, did you see his map? It didn't match it. Oh, okay. So, but you know, who can blame them? So nobody at that time was thinking that the ground was moving at such a level that it would actually affect the closure of the surveys. But then, when Don Swanson and others came along, and they recognized, we're looking at the geology, we see all these cracks, we see these poly, boom, wonder why those cliffs are there. Okay, they noticed these geologic features and these earthquakes, and they said, hey, you know what? Maybe those surveyors were not so bad after all. Maybe the ground was moving. And that was met with some skepticism by certain people. So scientists is what we do. We collect data. We start off with this hypothesis, which is like, oh, maybe things are moving. And then you start analyzing existing data. So Don went back all the way, looked at all the maps, and he discovered, in his words, the south flank of Kilauea had moved southward by more than 10 feet between 1896 and 1970. Using historic data. So, and then Don, to hear him tell the story is so much fun, because even now he gets so excited. He is outright giddy. And as he writes here, this finding was at the time astonishing. And as he says, my pulse still races, remembering those evenings with his weighing calculator in 1970, crunching old surveying data that had hidden such secrets. The final conclusion was that at least through the first half of the 20th century, the south side of the volcano was moving away from the rest of Kilauea. So nowadays, most people here are probably familiar with that. It's things that we've learned through earthquakes like 1975 and others, and you go to the excellent interpretation centers at the park, and all of the information coming out from the Summit Museum and USGS and everybody. And this is kind of a familiar concept now. But 50 years ago, minds were blown. It's like, really? So then, the main question was, okay, if we can look at historic data, let's see if we can have it moving right now. So back in 1970, HVO was able to procure a state-of-the-art laser ranging instrument called the geotometer. So I'm a geophysicist. I work with lasers, and lasers are awesome to help you do geophysical measurements of the Earth. And the one back then was it was budget breaking, as he describes. In 1970, it was $25,000. So adjusted for inflation, that's about $218,000 today.
Oh.
And a lot of our instruments still cost that, to be honest. So they deployed this geodometer, this laser ranging instrument that could measure over great distances, and they would measure from the top of Helena Poly all the way down to the coastline, including Halapē and all of the features around through there. And what they confirmed was that yes, South Flank, that coastline, was indeed moving away from the shoreline. But then they started doing repeated measurements, and they noticed something strange. They actually started noticing that the shoreline was getting closer to the top of the poly. And that kind of went against this model. There was something else happening on Kilauea in 1970. What else? Anybody remember or know? Anybody hike out to Mauna Loa on the East Rift Zone? So there was a southeast rift zone eruption going on. Mauna Loa was going formed. It was from 1969 to 74. So that eruption was going. So there was a lot of magma traveling through the rift zones. And so the idea was like, okay, well, there's magma coming in. That could be pushing the top of Helena Poly towards the ocean, but you would expect the ocean to keep moving away, the coastline. But in fact, it seemed to be getting closer, which they were confused by because it didn't match the history and it didn't match what they were expecting. And then they noticed relatively small earthquakes, like Cindy was talking about magnitude 4s, and so being relatively small. But they noticed when there were magnitude 4s and they would go out and measure, they kind of measured kind of a change in between contraction and expansion between the top of Helena Poly and the coastline. And so they, in Don's words, it appeared that the flank was metastable or teetering and susceptible to even relatively small, brief stress changes related to the earthquakes. As Don says, this alarmed us. Was the flank preparing to have a big extension event? Unfortunately, at that time, as they were on the verge of this, lava flows from Mauna Loa, which you now drive over at the Asian Raiders Road, covered the old chain of Raiders Road and also covered the benchmarks that they were surveying from. So,
Of course.
things are always changing up there. So they could no longer go out and make those measurements. So the story was put on hold. Don, as all good scientists, write up the information, and they were in the manuscript that he was writing in 1974. He included a section that said, we anticipate a subsidence event, strain release, of unknown magnitude in the not too distant future. That was 1974. His scientific paper was in review. You know, it still takes a while to get these papers out. And it was no different back then, a little longer. His paper wasn't published until 1976, but people working on the paper knew that was the idea. And by the time the paper was actually published, he was able to add this additional sentence. A major subsidence event took place in the Helena Fault System on November 29th, 1975, 15 months after this paper was submitted for publication. So that is how Don took 100 years of observations and maps and new observations and new ideas and put together this idea, but based on what they were seeing, it was possible that an earthquake was likely. So that was a Saturday. The epicenter was actually near Kalapana, further up the coastline, and the maximum ground subsidence was near Halape. So the whole coastline subsided to varying degrees. And then the maximum near Halape was over 11.5 feet. So that is just the down drop motion. And you've seen the pictures of the coconut trees being submerged, and you've heard and will have stories about the people who were actually down there for this event. It generated tsunami over 50 feet high. backcountry campsite of Halapē, west of Kīlauea. The tsunami swept around the island, damaging boats in Hilo Harbor and killing 2 campers and many horses at Halapē, where the coconut palms were drowned. The 2 people killed were Michael Cruz, a local fisherman who was swept out to sea, and there's a memorial to Michael Cruz at the top of the Haleakala Trail. The other person who lost their life was Dr. James Mitchell, a Hilo physician and a Boy Scout leader, and father of a former HVO volunteer.
Who's now a volunteer for the museum?
There you go. So wonderful things, and none of this could happen without the volunteers. So it was a tragic event in that lives were lost, but it was an event that, based on the data, there was evidence suggesting that it might happen. And so the measurements that were made after the earthquake matched up with what was expected. It did actually cause, because of the extension, this part of the south flank of Kilauea moving towards the ocean, but the rest of the volcano in tension as well. And there was some cracking at Kilauea summit. Poor Park, it always affects the roads, breaks the roads. And there was a tiny eruption in Hawaiian Mountain. So, will this happen again? Everyone?
Yes.
Yes. This will happen again. It's happened countless times before. It will happen countless times in the future. It's how the volcanoes work. So, as Don says, don't plan your meals around it. But don't be surprised when the South Lake experiences a very large earthquake, collapses, and generates a tsunami. And so, moving on to the final stage here, let's consider some other earthquakes to kind of put this event in context, and Cindy introduced this as well. So, this 1975 earthquake was one of the largest ever recorded in Hawaii since Western records have been kept. The current magnitude is estimated at 7.7, and that's what you see on most of the literature and information boards now. There were not as many instruments, seismometers back at that time, and there are different ways to calculate earthquake magnitudes, and more data are analyzed through time. So the numbers of how big it was in terms of magnitude have changed over the years. Don't worry, it's a big earthquake. The actual number, there we go, see? It is okay that the numbers don't match because of the information that it takes to calculate the magnitudes. In any case, it was a very large event, currently estimated around 7.7 using modern methods. But as you look at even some of the handouts, so I brought a paper that was published, I think it was in 1985, by Don Swanson and others talking about the event. At that time, they were referring to it as a 7.2, and so in the information, you'll see different numbers. It's okay. The largest earthquake in the last couple hundred years was the Great Kahuku earthquake, which Cindy mentioned. That was on April 2nd, 1868. And that was estimated to have been at least a 7.9, as Cindy said. Destroyed houses, toppled stone walls, open ground cracks, threw people off their feet. The epicenter was not too far from here. None of us would be standing here or sitting in chairs if we were here when that earthquake happened. Nothing here would be left standing. It triggered a lot of landslides, including one in Wood Valley that killed 31 people. And that earthquake caused eruptions at both Kilauea and Mauna Loa. So moving forward, here's a question. What was the largest earthquake in Hawaii since 1975? That was a big one with people about 2006. That was actually 2 earthquakes, a magnitude 6 and a 6.7. But there's actually a bigger one, more recent. Cindy even mentioned it.
6.9 May 2018.
Yay, you get the prize. May 4th, 2018, magnitude 6.9. What else was happening in May of 2018? Fishery, there you go. So if that eruption did not happen, this earthquake would have been the event of the year that we would all be talking about. However, remember in the beginning I kind of mentioned there's this intimate connection between magmatic intrusions on the rip zone and earthquakes. Look what happened in 2018. So there we go. And it generated a tsunami, and it was one of these décollement events. Did anybody feel it?
Yeah.
Okay. So there you go, see? So now imagine in 1975, you run through the numbers, and there's actually a cool USGS website tool. How much bigger is a magnitude blah, blah, blah earthquake than this magnitude? So you punch in the numbers, and the 1975 earthquake was 16 times stronger in terms of energy release than 2018. So just for people who felt that earthquake, to put these events in perspective. So 1975, 1868, 2019, they're all along this fault zone between the volcanic edifice and the crustal oceanic crust. Everybody remember the name? Décollement. Décollement. And why is it so dangerous for earthquakes and tsunamis? It's shallow, you get big movements, and they trigger local tsunamis, which were not, even with the best technology you can imagine, it would be impossible to get the warning out to everyone in time to respond, as David and Cindy talked about. So we're reaching the end of my story today. So this has been a tale of discovery, and it does not stop. It keeps on going. As folks know, the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, we monitor the volcanoes now. We have field instruments and satellite data, and we can measure the entire volcano to fractions of an inch. These are capabilities that were not even imaginable by Don at the time. They had hoped for that. 50 years later, we have these capabilities. But it's still the scientific understanding of the processes and the recognition that when things happen, it can cause hazards for those of us who live on the island. So we have new monitoring methods, decades of discovery, and that helps us understand what's going on and how to prepare. So last slide here. So this has been an amazing tale of scientific discovery, and Don Swanson is the star of this tale, and it's really amazing. And so much of the work that we do now is based on work that he's done in a lot of areas, not just this one. But again, just in closing, the 75 earthquake is a cautionary tale. Okay, massive earthquake happened, more will happen in the future. We can learn from that, and that will help us prepare for future earthquakes and tsunami. And again, just reiterating, it was not just a cautionary tale, but a tragic tale. And a goal would be, in the future, there are some situations where you may not be able, there are limited options. So as David said, when you are someplace, no matter how nice it is, be thinking about what you would do and how you would respond. So let us learn from the past, help us understand the present, and prepare for the future.
Amen.
Oh yeah, question, yes sir. So the question was, given the history and the success in that particular case of using measurements to understand that there was a likelihood of a large earthquake on the south flank of Kilauea in 1975 that led to that event, were there any similar signs in 2018? For several years, there had been a buildup in pressure and magma accumulation around the summit and along the rip zones of Kilauea in the years leading up to 2018. And so it was a very complex event. This takes us back to the beginning of what I was talking about, this interplay between the intrusions, the magma movement, and the earthquake. So we knew that the south flank was accumulating stress. And this is a side topic, because it's a very complex system, but this is cool. So between 1975 and 2018, pressure was building up. In the late 1990s, we started using a new technology, GPS, continuously recording all the time. And what we noticed is that the south flank of Kilauea was moving away as expected. But then every so often, every couple of years, it would actually accelerate. And this was called a slow slip event. At the time, they called them slow earthquakes, but that's not really accurate. But it would release the energy equivalent to a magnitude 5 or 6 earthquake, but it would do so over a couple of days. And so we were able to track these. And then when 2018, so the whole system was under pressure, under stress. And so then you have the massive intrusions along the East Rip Zone in 2018, more magma coming into the system, and then you get into this feedback loop of intrusions, gravity pulling, things being primed, and then you have one thing, and then it leads to another, and then it leads to another. And so what's interesting is since that time, that earthquake in 2018, we have not had any of those slow slip events. In that 2018 event, Ingrid's models have shown that it probably released enough of the stress that it could be decades before we start seeing those again. So that's the good news, is that we're not seeing that same level of strain accumulation at this time. So anyway, that's a long answer, but yes, sir.
So this is basically describing the Helena slump?
Yes.
Okay. And if I understand correctly, the kind of the grease behind the movement is layers of ash between the lava. So the ash doesn't let the layers of lava grab each other, and so the slip is sliding down slow on top of ash.
That is part of the answer. So the geology along these boundaries, it's not, you look at all the pictures and it's just a clear line, and the reality is much more complex. So there are deposits like that, hyaloclastites, things of that nature. You also have to remember that Kilauea is not just its own volcano growing on the seafloor. Kilauea is growing on the flank of Mauna Loa. So you start going at depth and you start getting into the Dekalmat region, especially inboard towards the interior of Kilauea, and then you have all kinds of structures interlaced between Mauna Loa and Kilauea. And not only that, there was this big Mauna Kea volcano that was very active. And so underneath Kilauea, there are actually Mauna Kea flows and material from Mauna Kea eruptions. And you can still find those when you dredge offshore of Kilauea. So you have this whole mix of all different materials from different volcanoes, things building up. You have lava flows, you have ash material and all of these things like that, lots of different types of mud, and there's pore pressure is one of the ways that you can, it's amazing how pore pressure, just a little bit of fluid pressure, can make large things seemingly movable, actually make them mobile. And then you have these series of slumps, which is interesting, you use the word slump, so that's what we're seeing with Hina Poly. The polyfaults don't actually go all the way down to the Dekalmat, based on geophysical surveys that have been done. They're little slivers, and so they make that slump. And what's interesting is that slump builds up offshore, and it almost makes a little buttress. And so rather than the catastrophic scenario of the whole half of Kilauea sliding off, what we tend to see is that surface part just kind of doing the slumping instead. So does that answer that question?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, everyone.
All right, that was Dr. David Phillips. And I think I should just, let's pull him off there and just add a picture here of Don Swanson there on the left, and that's Dick Fisk on the right. Dick Fisk passed recently, was the subject of recent Volcano Watch in the last few months, and there's Don Swanson on the left, who we all know and love. What'd you think, Dane?
Yeah, it was a really strong, presentation, a lot of information in there, and I love how he didn't escape the Helena slump question at the end. I mean, that answer is like, there's so much in there that he's talking about, from pore pressure to the, the trading of the driver's seat, so to speak, between the rift zone and the flank. Like, and this what we talked about in 18 as well. Like, the rift zone drove it, and then the flank moved with the 6-9, and then all of a sudden the flank started driving the car for the, the rest of it, or until, and only recently with these episodes has locked up again or stalled, so to speak, the movement, that accelerated movement we saw after 18. But the thing about the slow slip earthquakes, we've talked about those though as well, but I didn't know that there hasn't been any since, that's a hard thing for us to really track that, but for them to come out and say just definitively there haven't been any.
And they don't expect any for decades.
Don't expect any. Right.
Yeah.
So that's, as we've talked about, a long process to get back into that far into the rift zone. And we're watching that process unfold with all these summit eruptions and the activity that we've seen over the past 8 years.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, like a couple other thoughts, really like that image of Don's model that I put on the screen, it looks almost identical to what the similar ones we showed today. It's little different details here and there, but the overall picture is pretty much right there. And
It'd be scary. It is scary to think where we would be in Hawaiian volcanology without Don.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like the amount of stuff he's had a hand on that's like fundamental now to the understanding of the volcano, to the point of the
and
South
colleagues,
Flank.
and
the colleagues, and even Jeff Judd, we do not a volcanologist, but we know has had a significant hand in all these things back in the day.
Wendell Duffield was the third of these guys in that original paper, right? Roger Dellinger, another one. Anyways, it goes on and on and on. All these guys. Yeah, but interesting to note that even when Don's notes that when he's claiming his win there for having essentially anticipated that big movement on the South Flank, he goes and notes the social impact that the movement on the South Flank is going to have on people. Right, he immediately goes to the hazard and impact on communities in his publication right away. Right, I think that was really, really impressive as well to see that focus very early on too. So that was, like as I've called it, I think I call it the discovery of the South Flank, right? Maybe it's a little fanciful there, but
and what you were saying too about the photos, that some of those photos, we've seen a ton. Some of those photos we've seen all over the place, but some of those photos I've never seen before, and I think you said you've never seen them before as well, even if they are of the same event, so to speak.
The photos we showed today, I think, were all ones that I put in myself.
Okay.
Yeah, although there were a couple that I found for here as well. Yeah, like the old geodometer that the HVO scientists were using, like on top of Mauna Kea back there. So fascinating stuff. Yeah, it's to go back to the giants here, and story of how all the clues came together for us to understand a little better where we are and what the hazards are where we live here on Hawaii Island. Anything else to add, Dane, before we wrap it up?
We did have a couple more donations come through. Wanted to shout those out. Ronald with a $10 donation on YouTube, as well as a $20 donation from Two Feathers on YouTube as well. Appreciate the support there, and sorry I missed those in the first round.
Wow. Thank you guys. I appreciate all your support. Thanks for sticking with us and through this presentation. As I mentioned, there was more that was part of this Remembering Halapē event. So we will bring that to you as we can, as it comes together here on the back end, do it right. So, all right. We're waiting for episode 42 here in the next few days. Could be as soon as tomorrow.
Keep an eye on it.
As late as early next week.
And if you do want to get notified as to when that happens, we do have a list over on hvri.org/subscribe. You can click on our volcano alert messaging and you'll get an email then when the episode is just getting started. This helps in case you're looking to get up there and go view it. We try and call it early as can, but not too early. That is not actually the episode.
All right.
Yep.
So, all right, guys. Until next week, then we'll recap what happens between now and then. And until then, we'll all wait 42 together. And for Luatori, who's not here with us today, our interpreter is Carrie Andano. Mahalo as always. Dane DuPont. I'm Philip Ong for a nonprofit HVRI. Until next week. Aloha, everybody.